Hello, my name is Thatcher from the SDM Foundation, and in the video today we are going to be talking about Google Sheets. And the first thing that we should do is answer the question, what is Google Sheets?
Google Sheets is a web-based spreadsheet application. It is digital sheets split into both columns and rows, which then creates cells determined by the row and column. Each cell can be filled with whatever information the user desires. This allows for keeping track of any sort of information in a customizable manner. Sheets also has built-in capabilities to visualize the information in a variety of ways, as well as functions to automatically gain further information based on what is entered, such as a sum of numbers.
So that answer is quite broad and for a good reason because Sheets is software that can do all sorts of things and can be used for all sorts of purposes. And the best way to get an idea of, you know, uh, what sort of data people might keep track of and how they might organize it is to take a look at the template gallery. So in here, we can see some examples of real life applications for Google Sheet spreadsheet, such as, attendance or grade books, assignment trackers, financial data, specific analysis on, something like city bikes, uh, NCAA tournament upsets, keeping track of those, baby name analysis, um, a to-do list, budgets, schedules, planners, just weighing pros and cons, invoices, expense reports, website traffic, analytics dashboard, all sorts of things that involve gathering data, manipulating data, or doing formulas with data, and keeping track of it, as well as changing the visual layout of that data so it's easily understood. There are several ways to start a new spreadsheet in Google Sheets. And the first one we're going to talk about is going to the website directly. There's various URLs you can type in to get there, but the official one is docs.google.com/spreadsheets. From here, you can just click on blank spreadsheet and you'll have a new spreadsheet. The first thing I recommend doing is giving it a name so that you can easily identify it later. So another way to do it, if we're here on a new tab page in Chrome and you're logged into a profile, which you should be to use Google Sheets, you'll have the 9 dots in the top right. You click on that, and then Sheets will be an option. Clicking on that, once again, takes us to Google Sheets where we can create a blank spreadsheet. A third way is if we're in Google Drive. In the top left, when we click on New, we can go down to Sheets. Clicking on that will once again give us a new spreadsheet. Here we are in a blank Google sheet, and we're going to talk about rows and columns. So the way that these spreadsheets work is that they have an infinite number of rows, as we see here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, etc. going down. These are the labels of each row, and then across the top we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc., which are the columns. That means that the cells refer to the column and row that they are in, sort of like bingo. So the current cell I have selected here is D8. So it's in column D and row 8. So now that we understand the basic layout of the columns and rows, which create the individual cells, next we have to take a look at the top area of the spreadsheet, which has all of our buttons for different functionalities, and above that, we've got different categories that also have abilities within them. So if we start with the little tabs here, File, as in most programs, allows you to create a new spreadsheet, open old ones, import things, make a copy, share, download, rename. It's where we have version history as well and settings. Edit, you have your typical edit functionalities like undo, redo, cut, copy, paste, as well as the little keyboard shortcuts over on the right-hand side for those same functions. Under view, we have show, so whether we want like the formula bar at the top to show, grid lines, protected ranges, which we don't have any at the moment, it's something you can turn on. Um, we also have view for freeze, you know, uh, which we'll go over in a little bit, but this is how we would get there. Group, comments, and an insert. We have, the ability to insert cells based on where our current cell is, inserting rows or columns, bringing in a new sheet because, you know, technically each time you create a spreadsheet, you're actually creating a workbook that can have multiple spreadsheets within it. We have the ability to bring in pre-built tables, charts, pivot tables, images, drawings, uh, more functions. Under formatting, we can switch the overall theme. We can format how we want all numbers to be entered, formatting text, uh, aligning text, wrapping, rotation, smart chips, which are sort of pre-built pieces, font size of things in the cells, so that whether it's numbers or plain text, conditional formatting, and alternating colors. Under data, we have a whole lot of things that involve different ways to sort the sheet, creating filters. Here's the ability to create, protected sheets and ranges so that those won't get affected by sorting and things like that. Um, you know, uh, Naming some of those ranges or naming functions, and stats about the column, data validation, data cleanup, which is stuff that is a bit more advanced. And then under tools, we have the ability to create a new form, which can be tied into what goes into the spreadsheet. So if you create a form, you can then have things entered in the form end up in specific areas within the spreadsheet. We have, spell check, suggestion controls, which turns on or off these suggestions when you're working. So if autocomplete is constantly showing up and it's not the type of autocomplete you want, you could come in here and turn that off. Notification settings as well as accessibility. Extensions, a variety of ways to bring on additional features and additional functionality into the spreadsheet. Help, which allows you to search the menus for certain things. Just general Sheets help, which would take you to tutorials and guides from Google. Help Sheets improve, which allows you to make suggestions about ways that they can change the software, a list of all the functions, as well as a list of the keyboard shortcuts. And then accessibility, once again, is a greater category that has a variety of accessibility features in it. Underneath the tabs, we have our little toolbar, which is a quick way to get to some of the more common features that we would have found within the tabs. such as in the top left, search the menus with that little magnifying glass, the undo and redo, print, paint format, how zoomed in we are, quick formatting options to quickly format numbers as currency or percentages, moving decimal places, and then, more formats there. The ability to change the font size, and then other text characteristics like bold, italics, strike through, the color of the text, fill color, borders, and then if you have three dots, that means there's more stuff. If you have a larger screen, there might just be more of these buttons along the top here. But now we also have alignment, for the text, as well as vertical alignment within the cells, how text wrapping applies when we've got images or things to wrap around, text rotation, inserting links, comments, charts, creating filters, the filter views, and then another way to get to functions. So multiple ways to get to the same things. And now we're going to go over an example of implementing one of these tools. Here we are in a Google Sheet template that is just a pre-structured sheet. And as we can see here, the purpose of this one is to be a daily schedule. So we have the days of the week along the top here. And what we're going to be talking about today is freezing the header. So if we scroll down, as we start to get further in the day, we can no longer see the days of the week, which correspond to these columns. Obviously, we can sort of infer or remember, but there's also a way to keep them visible as we scroll down. So if we go up to View and then Freeze, you'll see we have some options here. No rows, which is just sort of how it's set now. One row, so that would be the first row, freezing that. Two rows, or up to five. The reason why it says up to five is because I'm in the fifth row. But we only really need up to the fourth row, so I'm going to select that, go to View, and say up to row 4. Now you can see that there's this dark gray line right at the bottom of the fourth row. I could change that to change how much is frozen, but as we scroll down, those 4 rows remain visible. Very useful and a commonly used feature in Sheets. One thing that we haven't touched on that is vital to using spreadsheet is actually entering data and ways to go about that. So the key thing is that you have to have a cell selected, right? So you can click on any cell where you want to start entering text. I am going to start up here in A2 and just randomly label these expenses, even if it doesn't exactly make sense as to what is being charged. Well, let's just say that this is a water bill. This is electric. So we could type in a cell, select the cell below it with our mouse, type the next one, and so forth. But the more efficient way to go about it, which I just did without explaining, is actually to, enter one thing in this cell. So let's say that this is cable. And then instead of clicking on the cell below, if I know I want to go to the next cell down in this column, I can just hit enter or return on the keyboard and it automatically puts me in that cell and I can just keep typing. So, dog sitter, something random. So, that is probably the easiest way to go about continuous entry of, whether it's normal text or numbers. So I can just keep hitting enter after I type something in. So let's say this is car payment, enter. Now I'm on the next line. It also works for going over to the next column. So I could just, you know, select B7 or C7, but instead, what I could do is tab over. So let's say that um, this is a rent. I hit tab, and that takes me to the next column in the same row. And tab will continuously do that. Um, One other useful tip is the arrow keys on the keyboard will allow you to go to um, the next cell in whatever direction the arrow key is facing. So, left arrow key goes down, right, up. You get the idea. And for the most part, that is the easiest way to quickly do entries into a spreadsheet. Something that you're able to do to customize your spreadsheet is change the width of the columns and the height of the rows. If you go to the top of the columns where you see the letters, if you go in between the columns where the line uh, is between, for example, column A and column B, you can click and then drag that line to change the width of the corresponding columns. So as you can see, by dragging these two lines, I just made A and B wider. It works the same way for the heights of the rows. So you go to the leftmost of the sheet where the numbers are, and you click and drag on one of the lines in between the numbers to extend the row. Something that is useful to know is that if you want the row or column to automatically fit based on the size of the text, you can double click and it will format to the correct height or width of the biggest piece of text in that row or column. So once again, we can double click and it changes the width there to match this cell because it is the biggest in this column. Here we are in an example Google Sheet spreadsheet with some text and numbers. So if we want to format the text or numbers, we can absolutely do so. We can select a cell that has text, go up to format, and in the drop down, we can choose text to do common things like bold or make italic, underline, etc. We also have the ability to do alignment, just like you would in Word and other text processing. We can do the typical left, center, and right, but there's also top, middle, and bottom, which refers to the vertical alignment within the cell. So it's set to bottom, but if I choose middle, the cell is going to now have that text aligned in the middle. The same idea applies to numbers. We could go to format and number, but we've also got these quick options up here. So if you have numbers typed and you want to make them currency, you can select the cell, tap the currency button, and it will format it as such. And we can do the same thing with some of the other formatting options like percentages. And then we can even move decimal points around and various other numbering formats like date and time, things like that. Today we're going to be going over the equal sign and functions or formulas. So if we are in a blank cell and we hit the equal sign key, that allows us to either start doing some basic math using the cells. We can select a cell, use an operation like plus, select a different cell, and then when we hit enter to move out of the cell, now we get the result of the formula we just created. However, if we hit equal sign and start to type the name of a function like sum, we see a whole list of possible functions to add here, and we see what they'll do as we hover over them. And that works for any sort of formula. So you can see if we do count, we can also see countif or countifs, anything else that has the word count in it. So if we were to choose one, then it gives us a breakdown of the syntax required to properly use this formula. So first it wants a range, and then a criterion for the first range, and then the second range and the second criterion. That's for count ifs. So as long as there is text after an equal sign, it's referring to a function, whereas in other cells, like in our title cell up here, it's just plain text. Here we are in an example Google Sheets document, and we're going to go over a couple of simple formulas. So if we go up to the menu here and choose Insert and go down to Function, gives us a list of functions or formulas that we can input automatically. There's a whole lot of them, but we're just going to start with some very straightforward ones like average and count. So let's start off with average. So when we choose that, it sort of starts to create the formula for us, and it tells us what we need to add next to determine what we're taking the average of. So you can either type in the cell or you can click on it like I just did, and you can see that it puts the cell inside the function or formula. And then I'm going to hold shift so that it knows I want everything in between the first cell I selected and the next one I'm about to select. So it's going to take this entire third row when I hold shift and select that cell. So now that's all I need to do if this is what I want an average for. So I can click outside of that cell or hit enter, and then it gives me the average amount. In the next column, I'm going to do a count. So go back up to insert, go down to function, and go to count. And then I'm going to do the same range. So I'm going to select B3, hold shift and select N3, and then hit enter. So now if you see this pop up here, it is suggesting autofill. That is a way to apply the same formula to different cells. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to accept the autofill. There's multiple ways to do that. Um, so uh, I'll show you quickly how we can do that with the average too. If we go to the bottom right of the cell with our cursor, the cursor changes to a little plus sign. So if we click and drag that down, you'll see the black dotted lines. That represents how far we're going with the formula or the autofill. And if I let go, then it applies the same function to all of the other rows. So instead of having to do that over and over again, if I know that this is the layout of my spreadsheet and I want the average or the count for each and every one of these rows instead of just the one I did it for, we can autofill down. to have that automatically put in for the rest of the rows. Here we are in an example Google Sheet spreadsheet, and we're going to be talking about functions. Specifically, in this case, the sum function, which adds up everything in a column or a row. So to access that, we're going to go up to Insert, down to Function, and then all the way at the top here, we have Sum. If we click on that, it inputs some text into our cell that then allows us to finish off the formula for the function. So what it wants is the first value. So we can select the first cell in our column, hold Shift, select the bottom cell, and that finalizes the function because that's all the cells that we want the sum for. We hit enter, it takes us to the next cell and shows us the result of the function. So in that cell, we now have the sum total of all the columns above, and up here in the function bar, it shows us the formula. Here we are in a sample spreadsheet in Google Sheets, and we're going to talk about the basics of sorting and filtering. So uh, if you want to sort, you can right click on a column or a row, and you can see the option to do something like sort A to Z, Z to A. So if we do A to Z, it changes everything to alphabetical, and it uh, maintains everything else that was in that row. So all the data sets, stay lined up. But as you can see, it didn't take into account that we had a heading as well as a title. So instead of freezing the two rows, we could do something else like use a basic filter. So one way to set the range for that would be sort of select our uh, title row, or what identifies the columns, and then create a filter, and then we get a little filter icon or sorting icon, however you want to look at it, in the top right of each of these cells. We select that, and then we can sort A to Z, and then it keeps the titles in place and sorts everything else. And as you can see, it also gives us a lot of more in-depth filtering options. Here we are in Google Sheets with an example spreadsheet, and we're going to go over conditional formatting. So what that is you're able to set a certain condition, like a value or a certain name or type of text, and then you can format things that match it with a certain type of formatting, like a different color or changing the cell in some way. To insert that, we go up to Format at the top, go down to Conditional Formatting, and then the first thing we do is choose the range. So we'll just do our numbers. So we'll do A1 through G20, and then our rule is going to be greater than $5,000. So now everything that is greater than $5,000 gets highlighted in green, this green background. You can even add another rule. Why don't we do same range? Then we'll do less than 5,000, and we'll apply a different color. Here we are in an example Google Sheet spreadsheet, and today we're going to be going over creating a quick chart. So since we've already got our information here, we're going to highlight everything except for the total because that would throw off how the chart gets made. And then we're going to go up to Insert, down to Chart, and it automatically chose pie chart, which is fine for what we want to do, but you could go up here if you wanted to change it. And because of the layout we had, Sheets knows exactly how to accurately make this into a good chart. With the label for categories and the value of sales, it accurately comes out exactly how you would want it. Here we are in an example Google Sheet spreadsheet, and we're going to go over the best way to safely share. So in the top right corner of the screen or the spreadsheet, we have a share button, and when we click on that, we have a few options. At the top here, we can just start to enter someone's name, and if they're a contact, it'll show up. And if not, you can put in their full email address. And then after doing that, it will allow you to hit send. You can give them a little message if you want. And over here on the right is an important thing to take note of. It is their permission level. And when we click on that, we see our different options here. Editor, which is currently selected, gives them full access to do anything they want. Commenter means that they can suggest edits or make comments about things that will appear on the document but won't actually change the document. And then viewers are only able to view the document. They can't make any comments or make any changes. So if we were to send that off, then Tom would have access. So another way to share is by copying the link, but by default, that will not work unless the person has already been added. So if you want anybody with the link to be able to actually open it, you have to click on here where it says restricted. Then we go down to anyone with the link. And when we do that, then we have another permissions level drop down. We click on this to choose what the default access will be for people that just click the link. So very important to make note of. Here we have an example spreadsheet with some data already on it, and we're going to talk about comments and version history. So first, let's talk about comments, which would come from people that you have shared the spreadsheet with. If you've given them comment or permission, that's all they'd be able to do. Editors, I suppose, could make comments as well, but they could just make the edits themselves. One way to see them would be on the spreadsheet themselves. We've got this little orange corner, the top right corner of the cell, that shows that there's a comment in that cell. Also, in the top right of the spreadsheet, we have the Show All Comments button. Looks like a little speech bubble. And if we click on that, it shows all of the comments. You can also click on this comment, which will take us to that cell, where then we can see what the comment is. Obviously, this is just an example from my coworker here, and he just says, this is a comment, right? But he could have said something along the lines of, we're missing a total here. So then I would go and add a total so I could get a sum of this column. Or maybe he could say, the number in this cell is supposed to be this number, and then I would change it. If this was Google Docs, I would be able to just take the comment and apply it. For instance, if it was, a wrong number, I'll show you what I mean by right-clicking on the cell and then going down to comment to make my own comment, which is not something you'd usually do, but for the sake of an example, let's put in a different number, something similar, so like 14,755, right? If this is Google Docs, we'd be able to just accept that comment and then the number would change. That is not how it works in Sheets. So you have to manually make the changes. Um, so resolving the comment doesn't actually change anything. It's just a mark that you've seen it. So it's a bit uh, less convenient than Google Docs, but I think that's just because it might be a little bit too complicated to do that in Sheets, but maybe they'll eventually add that functionality. So I'm going to close the comments here, and now we're going to talk about version history. So if we go up to File, and we scroll down a little bit, we've got version history here. And we can name our current one if we want, which I did with some other ones, which we'll see when we hit See version history. So, currently on the current version, we've got this older version, which has one edit, which is sort of highlighted here in green. So the change to the background fill color that I made is one edit. So if I were to restore that, it would remove that change. If I were to choose this one, it would remove the red and blue columns that I made with the background fill. And then this example named version, which I named, would take us back to the original spreadsheet that didn't have any of those color changes. So if I say view original, it will show us what it actually looked like at first, which is obviously different from how it looks now with these columns filled in with those colors. So you have the ability to, switch back to other versions of the spreadsheet, and you can even name those so that you have a better idea of what was going on in that version.
All right, let's wrap things up. In this video, we explored the basics and beyond of Google Sheets, from navigating the interface and formatting your spreadsheet to working with formulas, sorting and filtering data, creating charts, and collaborating with others in real time. Spreadsheets can seem overwhelming at first, especially when you hear terms like formulas, functions, or pivot tables. But the important thing to remember is that Google Sheets is just a tool to help organize information and make tasks easier. You don't need to master everything at once. Even learning a few basics like sum, formatting data properly, or creating a simple chart can save time and make your work much more efficient. As you continue practicing, you'll naturally become more comfortable using advanced tools and features. One of the great things about Google Sheets is how flexible it is. You can use it for budgets, schedules, tracking projects, organizing contacts, analyzing information, and so much more. Whether you're using it at work, at school, or just in everyday life, these skills can go a long way. At the SDM Foundation, our mission is to make technology more accessible and manageable for everyone, regardless of technical experience. We hope this video helped make Google Sheets feel a little less intimidating and a lot more useful. If you found this video helpful, you can learn more and explore additional resources at sdmfoundation.org. And be sure to subscribe for more tutorials and technology tips. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.